Welcome to Full Azure Automation with PowerShell. This is part 3 of a series I've been doing to kind of bring it all together and explain how you can fully automate Azure maintenance and creation and things of resources with PowerShell. So this part is actually called Bringing It All Together, so it's going to integrate the previous two discussions I had, one on the Azure Automation account, which is really part of a service which is in Azure, and the other part was PowerShell client-side automation, so doing everything locally. Now I want to bring it together in a third, and so let me jump into that. And just for the record here, my name is Brian Kafaki, and I am a Microsoft Data Solutions Enabler. I focus on the healthcare segment, and there at the bottom is my GitHub account. So the slides and code, etc., you can find for my many presentations in github.com, bkafaki/shared. And in this case, these particular 3 sessions and possibly more follow-ups to kind of get into specific topics are under PowerShell Automation. So what is PowerShell? One shell to rule them all, one shell to find them, one shell to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. PowerShell is the one shell. Yes, I do like science fiction and fantasy books like Lord of the Rings, so I'm going to use that as a theme. So I like to think of PowerShell as the one shell that rules them all. And in that vein, I want you to go with me. My last presentation, I called it the Fellowship of the Shell. And this will be the next chapter in our saga, or the next book really, the 2 towers. And one tower is Client PowerShell, and the other one is Azure Automation, the Azure Automation account. And we will not be bringing PowerShell to the top of Mount Doom to be cast, to be melted down. We're going to keep it around because it is so powerful. We can use it for good. I do want to hope you like my artwork here, because I was afraid of copyright violations if I used actual pictures from the movies or whatever, so I made these myself. So where is our journey going? Well, we're going to talk about what do you need? What are the tools or components we need to do automation? So we'll look at that. Then I'm going to talk a little about the client side. Now, if you didn't do my other videos, you may be okay. I encourage you to go watch those videos because they'll give you a lot more depth, but I'm going to lightly touch on them so that kind of like when you step into a new episode of a series, I like to give you a little background in our last episode, that type of thing. And so I'll do that here and give you a little background. Also, I'm going to talk about the Azure Automation account and give you a little insight into that. But again, my other video is much more extensive, so please look at part 1 and part 2. And I'm also going to look at using the Azure Automation Authoring Toolkit. Not something we can say 10 times fast, but it is a really useful way to bring the two together. And that's really the focus of this particular discussion today. And finally, I'm going to talk about setting up our scripts to run in unattended mode. I may cover it a little earlier, but I put it specifically here to make sure I discuss that, because that's really important, right? You want to be able to run a job to maybe bring down VMs at maybe 2 in the morning over a weekend, or maybe you want to create new VMs or whatever you're going to do, or modify resources, and you don't want to be doing that during the middle of the day, and you don't want to have to keep manually going in and kicking things off. That would defeat the entire purpose of automation if you have to manually execute jobs. So we're going to look at how to do that in an automated way. So what are the tools we need? Well, we need an Azure subscription. Maybe seem obvious, but it's good to point it out because you're not going to get too far with Azure Automation without an access point to Azure. You can have an MSDN account, and that works too, or whatever other way you have, but you do need something, or a trial account. You'll need the PowerShell ISE. I'm going to be focusing on that. I'm not looking at third-party ISEs and stuff. I want to use what's available, and so I'm going to focus on using that as our client-side tool. The Azure Automation account, which is really a service you can create, and once it's created, it's really I'd call it more of a software as a service than a PaaS, but it's a full automated service we can use within Azure. We're going to need the AzureRM module, and I did talk about that also in the client-side automation. The AzureRM module is what allows us to do all kinds of, it has commandlets, basically, function libraries that connect and do things in Azure. And we're going to look at an Azure add-on called the Azure Automation Authoring Toolkit. Probably easier to say AAAT, but okay. So let's look a little bit at the client side of things, the PowerShell Integrated Script Environment or Editor. So we can see on the 2 ways to run PowerShell, if you're not too familiar with PowerShell, the left-hand side is the Integrated Script Editor, and the right-hand side is the Command Line Interface, CLI. So the Command Line Interface, the traditional CLI, looks just like the command prompt. But of course, it's a lot more powerful because instead of the old DOS type commands, which are really out of date, you get full-blown .NET-based robust commandlets that can do many things. And they actually have aliases so that you can still use your good old DOS commands if you're used to them, but they just remap them back to the commandlets of PowerShell. So one of the things we're going to do also, we need to take a look and say, do we have a version of PowerShell installed in our client that's up to snuff, up to the right level? Now, I'm not sure what level exactly you would need to work, but you want to be as up to date as you can. And if you're up to 5.0 or above in terms of PowerShell, you're good. I've been using 5.1 as you can see here, but just want to be as late as you can, and 5 or above is good. So what can we do? We talked about this before, but like, why Azure Automation with PowerShell? Well, we can create any kind of resources in PowerShell, whether they be PaaS services, whether they be full VMs, or NIC network cards, or storage blobs, or whatever. You can do all that with Azure. You can inquire about resources, so you can say, well, what's the status? What VMs are running, which ones are not, etc. You can change resources, and you can shut down or remove resources. So you might look around and you decide certain VMs or certain databases or things need to be turned off or deleted. You can do that. You can even do specific types of things like automating an Azure Data Factory job, or just using PowerShell or something else to do loads of data, for instance, an ETL job. Pretty much anything you can think of should be automatable, at least in terms of what Azure has. There's a lot of facilities to pretty much do whatever you want to do. And what we're looking at when we think of the Azure Automation account, we'll look a little bit later, is the ability to really run a job scheduling system that's very robust. So this slide, which is again online, you can go in GitHub, this tells you what you need to do to install the AzureRM module, and I do have a little bit of code in the sample demo area that also has a little bit on this. But you'll need PowerShell Get, which is a module manager. It's kind of the equivalent, if you used to Python, you know pip. Well, it's kind of like pip for Python, PowerShell. So use PowerShell Get, and then once you have that, you can use that to now install other modules that are sort of built in to a repository for download. All right, so let's do a little bit of a demo. So I'm going to go here. Now, I'm going to show you something. If I wanted to, one of the things I would want to do initially, I'm not going to actually run through it here because I've already got it done, but I want to start PowerShell in admin mode in order to install the Authoring Toolkit later. So I'm going to mention that. I'll come back to that. And if I need to install AzureRM as well in the PowerShell Get, I'll need to also do this, okay? But I'm already in PowerShell. So let me go here a bit. And one of the things I'm going to do is just do a little PowerShell code here. To bring in the AzureRM module, I can do AzureRM. Force means if it's already there, reload it. If you're working on your own custom modules, you want to use force to keep refreshing it if you're making changes. And the verbose will give us extra information about what it's loading. And so you can see here, all kinds of commandlets are being loaded. The output panel below shows us the commandlets being loaded. If you're not familiar with the ISE, again, go to my other videos. I've got a bunch that will talk about how to use the PowerShell ISE. And even the last one that I did that was more client-side automation, we'll get into more details. Now, normally I would have to log in with either add AzureRM account or login AzureRM account. Now, the login AzureRM account is actually an alias to this, so this is going to work no matter what. Alias just is a way that you can map one command to another in PowerShell, so that if you're used to ls, for instance, instead of get child item, you can do that. This is the piping command. And so, what I'm doing here is I'm just piping and saying I only want to see the environment here. I'm not going to do the login because I've already done it. And it's a two-step authentication, which is time-consuming, so I'm going to skip over that. I can look here, though, say, do I have a subscription? So get-AzureRM subscription will retrieve the subscription object, and I'm going to pipe it through select object and only return state. That way I don't have to give you other properties and that kind of thing. I can just show you, yep, and apparently I'm connected to 2 because I got enable twice. And I have a context set, and I can also do that. Context says basically I'm pointing to a specific subscription context, and I'm looking at Azure Cloud. And I want to try just demo something I have not shown yet to this particular thing, so I'm tying in a couple of things here. So I'm throwing in a tidbit, but this is a try-catch block. So if you're doing automation and you wanted to be able to trap errors, there's a couple of ways to do it. One is using a throw operator, which reminds me an awful lot of SQL store procedures. Or you can use your try-catch block, also supported by T-SQL. But what we have is try-catch block. We want to run Azure RM VM, and I'm giving it a name that does not actually exist, and a resource group that does not exist. And I have to tell it, this is really critical. I was actually trying to set up this demo and I forgot this and had to remind myself. You need the parameter error action because that's a dynamic environment setting or configuration setting within PowerShell that by default, I think it's depending on the level of the severity of the error, may not flag an error condition that you can trap. By doing the stop, it'll cause it to allow me to do the catch, so I can catch my errors. So the idea here is you're trying a statement. If it has an error, if it can't do the situation, there's an error raised, the catch block executes, and it should execute the finally block regardless of if it's successful or not. So typically the finally block would be, for instance, maybe somewhere in your code you opened up a connection to a database and you want to make sure no matter what happens, fail or not, you want to close that connection. So kind of wrapping things up. So let me run this. I'm going to clear this out down below, and I'm going to run this block of code. Okay, and you can see it's this part here is because I grabbed the error information from PS commandlet throw terminating error. So that's actually not only throwing the error, but it's also giving me the message, giving me the information around it. But here I was able to capture it with my own text. So I could do other things with this catch block. I could, for instance, maybe email somebody or write to a log file or do something else. But I can also do this. So I've trapped it and I've handled it in a custom manner. And notice that it says, "Have a nice day," at the end, which is the finally block. By the way, it's a good practice not to use host, not to use write host, and I do make mistakes. I apologize if you've seen that in my code elsewhere. Output is a better way to do it. Host is can cause issues and stuff if you use it. It's kind of like an overriding thing, whereas output is a little more relative. So good to use. All right, so kind of getting back to this, we'll clear us out again. A couple of more things just to give you a flavor of what I can do. I can use the get AzureRM resource, for instance, and I'm just going to get some information about, I have an error action, but I don't need it here. Basically about this machine learning account I have. So I have a machine learning service. And I can also do something like find, and here, notice I'm always piping. I like to use the select object, and here I'm going to say property. And here I decide I'd rather not show you my subscription ID, so I'm going to say, yeah, do all the properties but exclude subscription ID. And so I'm going to bring that back. And you can see now, you can see the information. So that's just a smattering. There's many things we can do, but I wanted to give you a flavor of how you would actually do PowerShell client-side interaction with Azure. Remember though, you're going to have to go through a manual login to do it. Every time you go in and you want to start doing stuff, you're going to have to not only do this, but you're going to have to log into the account with one of these. One of these two, you don't need both. This will log you in, and this is an alias that will also log you in. Okay, so do not get confused that I'm giving you two different ways to do it, but you do need to log into your account. And that's one of the things I really want to focus on here is how do we avoid that and do automation there. So we'll talk about that as well. So here's the problem. We did a really, hopefully, pretty comprehensive presentation in the last video and just a quick smattering here of using the client-side PowerShell ISE to do automation with Azure. And first time I did this, like, this is great, this is awesome. But then I started realizing there's some issues here. So the first issue I realized is, what about unattended execution? Now, personally, I don't like to be up at 2 in the morning, and I don't like to work weekends if I can avoid it. So Sunday at 2 p.m. isn't even really ideal for me to have to do work-related things if I can avoid it. If I can automate things, that's why I'm in this business. We should be lazy. You know, we should be proficiently lazy. And that means don't do things you don't absolutely have to do. We can automate things, but here we're stuck with this weird need to log into Azure. Now, I'm going to give you a caveat aside here, which is you could, and I have a presentation part where they did this. I don't think I've done it online yet, but you could create what's called a service principal, which if you've ever used something like SQL Server or other things, you create, basically it's an application account or an application ID or login that's designed specifically for a purpose, like running ETL, or maybe for a web application, you give it that kind of service account. And that way you can restrict security to what it needs. Well, in Azure, they call it a service principal, and that's the idea. And you could create that with PowerShell in the script. You could manually create one in PowerShell through the portal, and then you could say, okay, I'm going to use those credentials. But that leads to problem number 2. How do we safely store those credentials? I'm now going to have things like tenant IDs and subscription IDs and whatever else it needs. It's like 3 pieces that it needs just to do that kind of authentication. Well, I don't want to put them on my file system, right? I guess if I had to do it on premise, my option would probably be the best one might be put it in on-premise only, mind you, SQL Server, encrypt it, use always encrypted, put it there, and make sure it's safe that way. That would be, then you could use basically ODBC or some way of connecting. You could use even the SQL Server module and pull that data in and then use the credentials. Still not really keen on putting this kind of stuff in a SQL Server table if I don't need to. But that is the safest way. SQL Server security is like the best there is, especially with the always encrypted. Okay, so we could do that. And so there's ways of doing that. The other way might be to use something like Azure Key Vault, which is a better option because then it's in Azure and it's designed for that purpose. But the next step, though, let's say, those are things we could create and do, but is there a better way? What about creating a server environment? So another problem is, okay, so now we got the situation, we want to automate things. Maybe we want to turn on VM. Maybe we want to do things, maintenance to our databases, Azure SQL Data Warehouse or Azure SQL DB or Postgres as a service things, whatever, or analysis services. And if you're going to do that, then you're going to have to put something, you want a server that can run these things in a job scheduler, say over weekends and things. You want code that's under source code control. You want it to be tightly managed because obviously this is critical to your business and has potentially secured proprietary data. So you're going to have to create a server environment to support this because your laptop or your client machine is probably getting turned off at times and isn't designed to be that kind of service. It's not meant to provide something that's really what a server should be for. So now you have to talk about creating a server environment and deploying to it, and you get all that to deal with. Now you get another problem. What about a robust job scheduler? Now you've got Task Manager or the Windows Scheduler, or whatever you want to call it. That's okay. It's good for a default in de facto kind of utility, and PowerShell does integrate beautifully with it. However, it's not a very robust complete job scheduler. There are commercial ones that are much better, and my favorite non-commercial, at least non-independently vendored solution, I guess that would be the SQL Server Agent, which is a very robust multi-step job scheduler, integrates really well with SQL Server. So that would be an option. It might be something worth considering if you really must do it on premise, but my goal here is not to encourage that, but to show you a better way. And of course, all of this is going to require administration. So now you've got overhead and things like that to deal with. So now I'm going to come back full circle and say there's no place like home. What about staying within Azure? And that's where the Azure Automation account comes in. So when you're using automation within Azure, the key area I'm going to focus on, this is not the only option, but it's probably the core way to automate within Azure, and that's using something called Runbooks. So I'm going to show you a little more about this, and again, I did do the other video on it, but I want to just give you a refresher on this. So I'm in the portal here, portal.azure.com is how I get in. I want to create a new resource. I have one created. I'm not going to create one here for real. I create too many things as it is. But what I would do is I want to create an automation. I can just hit this. And you can see there's a bunch of things. Automation control. There's some management tools. There's automation suite, etc. I think it's operations automation suite is a thing you can get. And this will also tie into that. But so I would say I want to create automation, an automation service account. And it tells you you're going to do that. And so here I would give it a name, whatever it is. I would say, what subscription do I want to go to? And as pretty much everything in Azure, you have to tell it, what is the container? What's the box you're going to throw this in? So that's called a resource group. So you put something here to tell you what your resource group is. I actually like to prefix my resource groups with RG and then something around it because I think that actually is a good way to kind of, so I can look for resource groups together. Now by putting in a resource group, I can remove all of this by one basically deletion. Get rid of the resource group and everything related to it goes away. I like this to say create a run as account because as we'll see in a minute, saying yes to this creates a little script and credentials within an Azure account that will let me use automated authentication. So we've got all this stuff and then I can say create. And I'm good to go. The service will come back. It'll spin its lights. You'll see the little bell up here will show there's messages going on. It's telling you it's creating resources. And when it's ready, you can say pin it to the dashboard. But now I already have one in my dashboard. So let me go in there for a minute. And in my dashboard, what I have here is my automation account. You can see there's an activity log, things like that I can look at. I have access control, so I can add other people and do roles assignment and things within it. So again, this is a security feature. I can administer this. If you've seen before in my other demos, you can create tags. So a lot of times with tags, maybe you want to say this, who created this, what cost center is this running from, is it production, etc. So you're just basically creating really JSON type tags to this that you can say this is this and give documentation related to it. Because one of the challenges can be like when somebody is trying to administer cloud resources, it's like, well, who owns this? Who do I talk to if I have a problem? Can I remove this? You know, who's paying for this? Those kind of questions. There are other ways to do it, obviously, with auditing and things, but tags can be a useful feature. You have diagnosis things, configuration management pieces. I'm not going to get into this. Desired state configuration is a powerful feature. Not something I typically get very heavily into, but it's a more imperative way to manage resources, where you declare what you want, like Star Trek, and make it so, and takes care of it. But what I'm going to talk about instead is the process automation thing. So we've got runbooks, and we've got all these things. I'll start at the bottom here for a minute. Watcher tasks are an interesting thing where you can basically trap events and then have, when something happens, and you can use PowerShell scripts to sort of trap it, say fire off something. So you want to, maybe it's like somebody uploads a file of blob storage and you want to file off an ETL load, for instance, that kind of thing. And there's also something called run hooks, or webhooks, excuse me. And a webhook is basically a way to, through a REST API for practical purposes, through an HTTP request, you can call a runbook to run. So it allows you to sort of integrate externally from the service account itself. Hybrid worker groups, if you want to actually create runbooks, loads that can be done and share the load with your on-prem environment, you can do that. So you could actually have servers on-premise that are helping you service your runbook accounts. You have the runbooks gallery, which is really great because you get all kinds of things. If you want to know, for instance, how to turn on and turn off, you can see this shutting down VMs or starting them by tag. So that's really cool. A lot of different pieces in here. Now, when you see the icon, that tells you the type of runbook we're looking at. So this one that looks like kind of a org chart type thing with a box connected to two boxes underneath, that's a graphical runbook. So it's not PowerShell code. It's actually something you visually drag and drop, a little like SSIS or something, and then it creates a runbook. You set properties. So I'm not focusing on that. This type of icon would be a PowerShell script. And then there's also Python. So you can actually also have Python scripts, which is a new thing. It's still in preview, but so now you can write Python 2 scripts. So that's kind of thing that you can do. The gallery, though, which is a way to get a jump start on things. And when you create the service account, you actually get a few scripts to start off with that it creates. Then you have jobs here. You can see I've run some jobs. Now I'll go over to my runbooks. And in my runbooks area, you can see I've got a bunch of things over here that I can go into. And one of the things in my runbook, so what are runbooks? They're really just jobs. All right, they're just batch jobs. That's what they're designed to do. I'm going to focus on PowerShell scripts as the runbook of choice that I want to use. The other thing, the original runbook was actually a workflow, which was a multi-threaded PowerShell script that allowed you to leverage the workflow engine of Windows. And then, of course, now you have Python, so you have things in the graphical engine. So you've got all these different types, but I'm going to focus on one of these types. And I should also point out, you may see things referring to the Portal Classic. Before the Resource Manager was added, this ability to create all these resource groups and group things, it was called the Classic Portal, and it had a somewhat different look and feel. I think it wasn't as slick as it is now, and so that's called Classic now. And there are still code and things people have related to that because that's what they started with. But now we're using Resource Manager, so now we're using the new portal. But I just wanted to kind of call that out. So for instance, to use a runbook, I can go in, for instance, on this one, and it's going to list tags. And you can see it's run. And if I want, I can run it here. I can schedule it. So if I want to set it up on a schedule, I can go in here and then say link it to a schedule, create a new schedule. And you can see that I can now set a date and time. I can make it hourly, daily, etc. I can make it so I can do recurring, and I can do all that good stuff. So at the end of the day, the automation account is designed to be your batch system. It's designed to be your job scheduler, and it has some flexibility to be kicked off by events and things. But generally, I think of it like SQL Agent, for lack of a better word, or a much better version of Windows Job Scheduler or Task Scheduler. So think of it in those terms. It's designed to provide that batch scheduling within Azure. Okay, that's it. And I think it's in my view, it's probably one of the most robust places to do that kind of work because you have all the power of PowerShell. The only thing it does not provide that something like, say, SQL Server Agent provides is the idea that you can create multiple job steps and say, okay, do this, and if this job step succeeds, do this. So you don't get that within the job system itself. Instead, you have to control that through the PowerShell code. But since PowerShell can be organized, you can call other PowerShell runbooks from one. You can have a parent-child setup. You can call functions out of modules, etc. It's not too big a deal. You just have to basically make sure that your code, your PowerShell code, is a self-contained job, and you can trap things, you can raise events, you can do whatever you want within that. So it's not too big a deal. But in my mind, I still do like that idea of having multiple job step control. So I could say, try to do this. And if that doesn't work, next step, do this, and maybe you skip over a step. So that would have to be coded within the PowerShell code. All right. You can also, and you can set parameters and things also for runbooks. But let me get back here again. We'll go back here. I'll say OK. So if I want to edit my runbook, I can edit it by just clicking on Edit. And you can see I'm just saying get AzureRM VM, write output, that kind of stuff. And notice this piece here. What I'm doing here is I'm actually saying dot sourcing. And dot sourcing says whatever you create from this, keep it in memory. If I don't do that, but I just did this, it says just run this script. So you'll see, I'll show you that this script is just a PowerShell runbook. And what I did is I extracted the code, I copied the code that the automation account generated that was automatically logging in so that I could kind of self-contain it. But now I can just run it wherever I want in a runbook, and then I can do some work. So let me go back here for a minute. And if I look, this is that script that I have. And I can say view the script. And you can see it's just running this code, which is using a connection that was already built. So if I go back to shared resources, and I look under connections, what it's actually doing, it's calling this run as connection. And so and the classic is the old portal I mentioned. So the run as connection is what it's ultimately going to call, but there's still trapping, error code handling, and things around that. So I extract it and just make it a single script I can call to log me in to make it a little bit easier, a little more modular. All right. So if I were to do this, let me go into what I mean by this. If I wanted to create my own automatic login, I could go into this generated one from PowerShell. So this was done when I created the service. And from here down to here is the code that logs me in. So I could copy this everywhere, but I like the idea of creating it in one place because maybe I want to do some logging around it or do other things. So I could just say Control-C here. I hit Control-C, believe it or not. I could go in here and I could say add a new runbook. And I'm going to say create a new runbook. And it's going to be called log me in, not to be confused with some service there. The runbook, I'll say it's a PowerShell one, but you can see there's other types possible. And just so I said that, log me in, and it's created that now. And if I look, I can see, now I can paste it. And so now I've got this, I can say save, and all this is going to do is log me in. I could have any amount of other code below it, but what I can also do is I can publish it, or I can go to the test pane. Publishing puts it so that it's considered gold, basically gold copy, and now you can run it on a schedule, etc. But I want to test it. So, and by the way, commandlets are available down here. Modules, other runbooks, etc. But I'm just going to go to the test pane real quick. I don't want to spend too much time here because this isn't the focus. We've already done this in my other video. But I click start. Now when you use this, be very careful because it slowly displays messages from the last time you ran something, and you might think it's running your code, but it's not. It's a little misleading. You have to tell it explicitly on the click start to get it to do that. So this can take a second for it to kick off. There's a little bit of overhead getting things started, which is another reason I like doing development locally on my machine and then pushing it into Azure. Okay, now it says completed, and it kind of tells you that you've gotten in. It gives you some information back. That's about it. So now that I've done that, all I have to do is, if I want to create another runbook, I would just say, in fact, let me do this. I'll do one to call it, just to make sure it's clear what I'm saying. So, run some job, and the runbook type is PowerShell, and the description is use the login. All right, and say create. Okay. And what I want to do here is put a period and dot sourcing, period backslash. I want to then say log me in dot ps1. That's what I created before. And then from here I can say, we'll say write output done. I'll say did the login to make sure it's different enough that it will make sense. I can say save it. And then let's see, if I did it right, I can do the test pane. Hopefully that's the right name. I should be able to go over here and look. And I can see, oh, login me in. Okay, didn't really spell that well after all, but I'll do that, login me in. Not well named, but hopefully that will do it now. And then I'll just say test pane, start. And either we'll find it or I'll get an error back saying it didn't like it. I was actually wondering in my mind, should I use a / like Linux or / like Windows, but thinking the Windows format for that should work. So it says it's queued, so notice up here it's telling you it's queued. So kind of keep an eye on that. That tells you what it's doing. Queue means it's throwing in the queue. Runbooks do not have to run immediately. It's kind of like got a lot of stuff going on. So it basically goes into a queuing system as you would expect with a job scheduler, and it will run it as soon as it can. Okay, and it gave me an error here. So let me go back. I think so. I want to show you something that will be useful, because what I forgot to do is I created that script, but I didn't publish it. And so I think what's happening here is because I didn't publish it, it doesn't see it. So I need to go back to the login me in, which is a pretty bad name, admittedly. And what I can do is then take a look at this one more time. And you see it here, and now I can say publish, say yes, publish this, and by publishing it, it should become visible. So now I'll go back here, and I'll go into the run something, edit, and I'm going to take this off, and it should see it now. So let's try this again. Go to the test pane. Okay, so it worked, and you can see here it says did the login. So that lesson, the takeaway from that is, and this is what happens, you play with things and you sort of say what's wrong, and it can get frustrating because sometimes you don't know what to look for. But runbooks, the key is if you're going to call one runbook from another, you do need to publish it. And I have a tendency to leave things half-baked because I'm not really doing this for production. So in that case, I tried to create the script and didn't publish it. But once I published it, it was able to call it and use it. And so the takeaway also from that is you want to probably take, like I did, and this is the one I actually use, and I just take that logic and extract it from, a runbook that was created already by Azure, and then I'm able to kind of go from there and use that any place I want. So I basically, because I have to make sure that when my runbooks run, it authenticates and logs in. So this is one way to set that up and then just call the login script from different jobs I have. All right, so let me get done here. I think we've covered the basics here. So we saw jobs. We've seen how I can go in. I can add a schedule to a job. So I can go here and I can say schedule it. I can set it up as a webhook, which means I allow it to be called externally. I'm setting up an HTTP call basically. I can view the code. So I got a lot of different things here. And not to mention, of course, you've got security features. I can authorize who can get in and do things with this. So I really do like this. I didn't mention much about modules, but there's a lot of modules made available automatically within Azure for you, and you can just pull these in and use them. You can also upload your own modules. Now I'm going to show you a way. Normally if you do that, you have to zip up the entire folder with your module, and then you can upload it. So that was something I also kind of learned the hard way, but you have to do that or it won't let you. However, I'll show you an easier way to do that as well. But you can see all these neat things. Variables are great because what the way I think variables are ultimately there for is think of those as configurable parameter values. So the idea is if you want to say something like, what's the server name, and you know you're going to have to change it in your job depending on what you're running or something like that, you could set up as a variable and then use that variable in your scripts. So that's another topic that would be fun to cover. And you can see event grids allow us to link our runbooks. We think we talked a little about that. A lot of things in here. You got one here right here, stop and VM, so you really don't have to write custom code for a lot of it. I do encourage you to just take a look at all these things. And if you're a fan of using Azure templates, if you're not, you can use templates within PowerShell scripts and just use the template, call it, and you get the best of both worlds. All right, so let me go back here. All right, so adding automation. So what did we see? We saw that we can go in and add automation by going in, saying plus, find the automation account, create it. You do want to click on the default, which is making sure it creates a run as account, just to make, I think, your life easier. And also the pin on dashboard, when you create it, will automatically put it on your dashboard so you can easily find it afterwards. And you can see there's all kinds of things. We've got runbooks and jobs and assets, a lot of different pieces here we can use. And we can also see that when we looked in there, we talked about Runbook Types. So kind of reviewing that, you've got the graphic runbook. There's the Python new one, which is not out of GA yet, so it's still in preview, but you can do Python. And there's Python 2. You can do PowerShell, which was we saw also not shown here. That's what those boxes at the top. Not shown is a workflow runbook. Does not give you one by default. Workflows are cool if you need multi-threaded processing, if you need to have the job start, do something, and then pick up. Things like that it's useful for. I cover it actually in my book quite a bit, but it's a very, I don't want to say it's an edge case. It's very powerful, but it adds a whole new layer because there's a layer of translation and things between it. So if you don't need that workflow engine, I wouldn't recommend using it unless you need it. And then you can look at your job status at the end, so you can go into the job status and just look at that. And here we saw creating a new runbook. So we have all these options as we saw. And we also looked at editing. So when you're done with editing, you've tested, you can publish the runbook, and that becomes the runbook that will run by default when you have your schedules and stuff. And then you can go in and change it. And the test pane is for when you're in development mode. This slide also shows that it's very easy to put the param block at the top of a runbook and allows you to pass parameters to your runbook, which is nice. So really a runbook can be treated just like a commandlet that can be called from anywhere in your jobs, which is really cool. But do not forget to publish, because as we saw, it doesn't work unless you publish. And I'm not sure the commandlet binding that I show in this example is necessary. I'm pretty sure by default you'll get that anyway, but not going to hurt. Again, we saw this already, the different assets. You got schedules, you have modules, you have certificates, credentials, variables. So it's a very robust service. It gives you a lot. It's designed for this kind of thing. It's what it's built for, so really good thing to use. So now the question is, how do we integrate client-side PowerShell development with our Azure cloud-based automation service? So we kind of got two things. We've got what we're doing locally, and then we've got what's happening on the cloud. Really want to bring this together in a way that makes it easier to develop our automation. The answer is something called the Azure Automation Authoring Toolkit. So the Authoring Toolkit is an open source project that's been around for a little while, and it's great because it's exactly what we need. It is an add-in for the PowerShell ISE, so you can go out there, download it, and once you install it, it actually becomes integrated with the ISE. Really, really cool. You can see the link below. You can certainly go to Bing and just search for it, but it's PowerShell.gallery. It's in the PowerShell gallery, and you can get it there. Azure Automation Toolkit. So go out there and download it and get it and all that good stuff. I'm using a slightly older version than what I think is current, but hopefully everything is pretty close to the same. Now, in order to install it, you will have to start PowerShell as administrator. So you can right mouse click on the PowerShell, either ISE or the CLI. I'd say use the ISE just because it has both the CLI and script editing in it, so it's easier to stay in one place. That's what I'll be doing. So we're going to run as administrator. And I'm not actually going to go through and do this because I've already got it installed, but that's what you need to do, and then you'll be able to install it. This slide shows you what commands you would need. So you would have to make sure you have PowerShell get. That's the first thing. And then once you do, you can install the module. So you would do install module Azure Automation Authoring Toolkit. For some reason that's hard to say. I'm setting it to just current users, so if there's multiple users on your machine, you can just make it you. Now, once you've installed the module, it's just like any software you install. It's there, it's good to go. But when you want to use it, remember, it's basically just a function library. It installs as an add-in. So you just do import module, and then it brings it in. So you need PowerShell get, and you need to do the installing, and then you need to load it. And when you do load it, this is what you see, which is pretty cool, because you get this sort of control panel on the right, which has all the parts of the Azure Automation Service integrated now so that you can work locally. And I'm going to get into demoing more of that, so you'll see what I mean. but it's kind of neat because I can work with scripts and test them locally, and then I can just push them basically into Azure all in one place. So very nice. So let's do a little bit of a demo. Let me go into my PowerShell ISE. And so in order to do this, PowerShell Get, I think we've talked about in a number of other places, and you can see on my slide, but I would just say install -module, assuming I have PowerShell Get, and then the name is the Azure Automation Authoring Toolkit. So it will automatically find this and download it. So you can go to the web page, or you can just use the install this way. And you should be able to do that. And I have required version here. It's kind of a specific one, but you can just download and install that. Let me click this away because I'm showing it too soon. And this is the code you saw earlier, the PowerShell Get piece. This is what we just saw in that one line, install module. And in order to show the module, I would normally run this. It just imports the module. Now it's already here, so it's basically telling me that it's already there, so I'm not going to worry about that. Once it is there, I can toggle it to show it or not just by clicking on this. Okay, good there. So what is it giving me? Well, I want to flip back for 1 second, go to the cloud, and here's all my runbooks, for instance. Now, let me go back in here. In this control panel, if you will, I've already signed in. It's a bit of a painful process sometimes when you sign in, so I'm not going to put you through it, but I have two-factor authentication, which is really good for security because it means when I authorize and I go in, it says, okay, you give me a password, you give me ID, that's great, but now I'm going to call your phone, and you got to put another code in, a PIN code, and all that stuff. So I'm not going to put you through that, but all you would have to do is enter your credential here, what ID you're using, what subscription, etc. You're going to need, obviously, an automation account. I only have one. So you want to go into Azure and set up an Azure Automation account. Very easy to do. I think somewhere in here I've already demonstrated how to do that. In fact, I know I did in a whole nother presentation. So we're good to go on that, hopefully, because that's what we're trying to do here. We're syncing up between the two. And then we've got all this stuff. So we can, it's got a local encryption it uses as thumbprint. So that's just for my local machine. But what it gives me is I can go now to my runbooks, and I can see all my runbooks. You can see some are in edit mode, some have been published, so I would need to download those to use those. So you saw login me in, which is kind of a weird name for something. This thing, test storage key, whatever, all these different things. These are new runbooks that are not local on my machine. So if I wanted to bring this down, I could just say download, and then I could say double click, and you can see, okay, so now this script is here and I can work with it. Now, one of the things you remember before, we can call other scripts. Now the interesting thing is this is really designed to execute in Azure. So this is going to run another runbook, and you can see that's the runbook it's going to call, and that's to log me in. So remember we wrote that, we actually cut and pasted that from one of the modules here. We actually had to look, and I'll show you what it did. This is one of the scripts that when I created the account, it gave me some demo scripts, which is really useful because it kind of gives you a sense of how to write your own scripts. So I can just double click on that, and it says, oh, I need to download the runbook. So let me download it, and then I should be able to double click on it. And all it really did is, this is what would normally happen at the top of an account. Okay, this piece here, and that logs me in. So I can just cut and paste that into my other runbooks. But what I did instead was I put it into a separate runbook so that I could just call it and say, okay, that will log me in, and now I can move on. And then I can do something like this, which is going to run things. So I can do all kinds of cool stuff here. And I can also from here test it. So I could say, okay, I want to run this. I want to pick out a different one maybe. This is a really simple one. If I want to run this, I can just go here and say test draft in Azure. Now watch what happens when I do that. This is a bit misleading. It does the same thing in Azure, so it's just an interesting feature. It hasn't actually run. It's displaying the messages from the last execution, so I do need to say start the job. I don't know if I have any errors in here. There's not much to it, so hopefully the login will work. But it takes a minute for it to start up all the services. Now, bear in mind, this is not running on my local machine the way I had tested scripts earlier. This is actually running completely in Azure. It's running it as if I was logged into the Azure portal. And I am, but behind the scenes it's doing this. Okay, so it looks like it's running right now. Okay, now it says running. Yeah, so it does take a minute. Gotta say, a little bit sluggish there, but then it says running, now it's logging in, and finally did the login. That's all it really does. Real complex script, obviously. So again, it's a bit sluggish, but for what it's worth, it's kind of sluggish when you're in the portal a little bit too. That's just the nature of what it's doing. I think it's mostly there's a lot of setup required to get it going, then I think it's all good. So that's kind of a nice thing though, because I can be developing scripts, as you saw before. I don't have to keep doing some sort of like manual login. I can set up scripts that are automated with something like this at the top. Now that's not typically the one I've been using. I think I have another one here actually, like start VM schedule. Download that. And so this shows you that a runbook can take parameters, and the idea of this runbook is actually one I think actually I stole from Microsoft side. And you can do things like set preferences, but notice you can also set parameters coming in, which is really nice, and you can have all these different pieces going on. So there's a lot of good stuff going on there. This one I don't see an automatic login, so I'm not sure where that's going to happen. Let me look at another one, demo list tags. This is always a fun one. So this is the one I wrote way back, and I actually created an Azure login, a little better name, I think, Azure login.ps1. And what is that? Again, that if I look at Azure login ps1, and I already downloaded it, you can see it's just that piece of logic that will log me in with the credentials. So it's really cool. Gives me a login, and then I can run this. So I'll do one more login. It's going to do this listing thing, and then say I'm done. But what I can do here is say, oh, okay, test draft in Azure again. That's what it would do. But I need to start it scratch. And again, I find that throws me every time, because I think, oh, I'm seeing messages. Wow, that ran really quickly. But no, you're looking at the last execution. So you want to start it again. And you can see it says new. So what's the status up here? Now it's running. It's going through that sort of initial setup work. Now we're running, and now things go pretty good. Okay, so there it's listing some assets. It's listing my VMs. That's really, yeah, I have a lot of VMs, but fear not, Microsoft, I've turned them all off. I'm not wasting resources. So just in case anyone's watching, I do have maybe one active VM if I'm working in it now, but that's what's going on there, so I can close that. But I love that piece. See, that to me is really cool, because I can be working and coding, testing bits of code locally, but then when I want to run and test it there, I can. And if I wanted to publish that, I can just go in here and say publish draft. And now you notice this is now published, and it says in sync. So you can see this is only on the cloud, Python, of course. Other things are say that they're in sync. Some things may not be in sync. I think some like here it says like this is in sync, but let's say I did something here where I said test. That actually isn't a good place to do it because I'm actually published, so I'm not going to save that one. But if I went here and said, oh, let's go demo list tags, for instance. Good example. I could say, instead of just done, I'll say well done. Now let's say I save that, and you can see it's now demo list tag says it's updated. Interesting, it's updated in cloud, so it actually synced it up. And I apparently don't have to publish it again, which I'm kind of surprised since I made a change to it. Yeah, interesting. All right, so the bottom line here though is the sync status is really useful. Tells you when it was last modified. You can see which ones are in edit mode and which ones are not. They're brand new, so they're being worked on probably just on the Azure side, and you have to bring them down. And then which ones are published. That's really my takeaways here. When you want to bring something down to work on it, you do need to click on the download button. So it's pretty cool. If I want to create a brand new one, I can just say create new. What do you want to call my runbook? My runbook, whoops, my runbook 2, because I think I have a 1. And I don't believe I need, and notice you can say it's a script or it's a workflow. I'm going to say script. And it puts the extension on it. I did it wrong the first time. I put a PS1 on it because I'm so used to doing that. It does it, I have a double extension, and I can just start typing whatever I want. So, you know, my runbook, etc. All right, a lot of work on the runbooks. It's just standard stuff, whatever you can write in PowerShell. Let me talk about some of the other cool stuff though. So I don't do a lot of work myself with desired state configuration, DSC, as we call it. Mostly because DSC to me is very much a real admin. You know, those are your core admin people that create lots of stuff and do a lot of security stuff or whatever. And the idea of DSC is desired state configuration is sort of, I always picture Captain Picard, who tells them what they want and he says, make it so. And then everything just happens. And that's really the idea behind it. Desired state configuration is you set the rules. I want certain versions of software, I want certain releases, I want patches applied, or whatever it is. And Desired State Configuration, unlike the typical PowerShell scripts I do, instead of coding it programmatically to say download this and do this, it simply does sort of more of a diff and says, well, do I have that latest version? No, then apply it. Am I on the right version of Windows? No, change it. So it's syncing. So it's a very cool thing. I don't have a lot of use in my type of work for that, but it is very cool. Your assets, so I can go in here and do variables, so like sort of configuration parameters, credentials, connections, etc. And here's my favorite thing, modules. So you can see I have a lot of modules. So I'm not going to hit refresh because I find it's very sluggish because of all the modules I have. But you can see I have all these things, and you can see I have some things which are local, some things which are in the cloud and stuff, updated in the cloud, and things like that. And then you can see my personally created ones are UMD. So you can see here, like this UMD ETL is actually in sync between the cloud and my machine, but this is not. So I can kind of update different ones. I could say I want to bring in UMD class. That's actually a demonstration, I think, on classes, creating classes in PowerShell. But let's say I want to put UMD database somewhere. I can do that by simply saying upload. Now, where is this looking? Let me try that. And it says uploading module UMD database. It's not the fastest thing in the world. Notice the little gears going around there. But what's cool about it is if you were to do this with the normal Azure Automation account, which you can do, you'd have to zip up the folder that the module's in, and then it will unzip it. It won't take it otherwise. Okay, so that's working. While that's working, let me show you something else that's cool. Where is it finding the PowerShell modules? Well, it's looking to where PowerShell modules are typically found, which by default on a client machine is under your Documents, Windows PowerShell modules, and you can see all these things here. So these are the different modules I have. And you can also, if I did $PS module path, that's an environment variable. I always forget to put the env. That shows you. So these are really all the places I could put modules, but you'll see that the first one, and really the best one generally to put it, is that Windows PowerShell under Documents. When you are working on a group and you want to make commonly available functions or commandlets available, that's a good time when you want to put it in one of those common folders, the ones further down the path, which are shared by people. So you can do that as well. Okay, that's still updating, so that takes a little bit of work for that to update modules. Now, one of the things also I will point out about this is it always seems to be this utility never comes up in sorted order for the name modules, and you have to keep resorting it. Every time I do things with it, like upload a module, do things, it tends to get out of order, so you do need to keep clicking that. But you do have a search thing here, which is very cool. So you get a lot of really cool stuff here, and that was mainly what I wanted to show you. The takeaway from this, and I know I haven't done a great job of doing an extensive demo about using this and automation. I kind of did that in separate pieces, and now I just want to show you how you can bring it together. And I'd be really happy to see what people out there do, so try this stuff out. I'd love to hear what people's experiences are using the Automation Toolkit. Maybe I'm all wet, maybe it's not as good as I think it is, and you think it's horrible or you think it's great. I'd like to know, so let me know. And by the way, I'll put that at the end of my slide. I'm on LinkedIn. Like to network typically with people that are in somewhat similar fields to what I'm in on LinkedIn, or you can just say, look, just ping me, and when you do ask to connect, say, hey, I saw your videos, I really liked it. Makes me feel good, and then I understand, sort of where the connection's coming from. It's a great way too, because I do post whatever I post on YouTube. If I'm going around presenting somewhere, I'll usually post what I'm doing on LinkedIn, so it's a great way to keep up with what I'm doing in my exciting life here. Total nerd life here, totally. But anyway. Also, there's a nice help here, so take a look at that. It's pretty cool. Now, it looks like this was done here. Now, one thing I do find annoying for presentations is, although I can slide this, which is very cool for the PowerShell editor, it does nothing for the area here, so I can't really explode this up and give you any more. So the bottom line, again, with this is I've got configuration, I've got runbooks, I've got desired states, assets, and this is all integrated with the PowerShell ISE locally and the automation account. So this is all integrating with what's happening in here. So if I make a change down there and upload it here, it will show up, and vice versa, so I can sync things up. And obviously if I edit it here, I'd need to download it again, sync it up down on the client, but the toolkit actually does most of that automatically for me. Let me go back to my riveting slides. So again, one of my favorite areas is the runbooks. I think that's the most important part of this, is that I can test and work with my runbooks locally and then upload them and sync them up. But also the fact that the modules, so I could be working on a module and doing runbook testing and getting it all cool and working, and then I can just push everything up into Azure's Automation account and set it up as a scheduled job. There is no facility, I don't think, in here to actually do the scheduling piece. So you need to create the jobs here and then schedule them in Azure. And that kind of makes sense because the scheduling on a client machine is different than scheduling within runbooks. Okay, and you can see here, this is just a proof sort of thing. This is one Azure Automation Demo UMD that I uploaded, and it just shows that you can actually go in there and see what's in there, what commandlets I have, etc. So wrapping up in this end of the fellowship. So thank you for going on this journey with me. I know it was a long one. I hope it was worth it. The first thing we talked about was the tools. What do we need? Well, we're doing automation. And so in this case, we talked about the Azure Automation account. We talked about having an Azure account and subscription overall, because none of this would be necessary otherwise. We talked about the PowerShell ISE locally, and then we talked about the Azure Automation Authoring Toolkit. Those are the tools. We talked about the client side, fair amount of detail, and I have a whole other presentation you can look at, and also the Azure Automation account, which I also have another video on. And then using the Authoring Toolkit. And we talked a little bit about setting up, and I put this as a bullet point just to make sure I covered it, but we did talk about that. This is where we cut the code out that logs us in automatically so we can do unattended mode. So that idea, we could schedule it and it will just run. And no matter what happens, look at the example scripts that when you create the automation account that are created for you. They're really good as a way to get a starting point. Also look at the gallery. Lots of good scripts out there. Because I know it can be a little intimidating to get up to speed on PowerShell, what's going on, etc. I always like to look at existing code and kind of play with it and tweak it, and then I can learn like how it does what it does. Again, I have my LinkedIn account. On the lower side, you can see my brilliant artwork of the two towers, the ISE and the Automation Service Cloud, and the big ring of power, which is PowerShell. Thank you. Please subscribe, please like, please share. And again, I've seen people actually ping. One of the reasons I did this is because somebody actually sent a message saying, I want to see the next one. So I respond to that kind of stuff. So please do that. Again, I find certain things are really popular versus other things, and I'm trying to figure out what people really like. Not that I'm a complete going for popularity here, because I love PowerShell, but I do like to see that it's getting value and getting used. Thank you.